Welcome back to my series on the Annotated Bibliography assignment for English 1. I'm Professor Pecora, and in this video I'll discuss the evaluation paragraphs required for each source in the annotation in this assignment. In my English 1 classes, when I ask students to evaluate a source, I'm primarily asking them to discuss the credentials of the author. Credentials may include details about the author's educational background, professional work experience, and other information that indicates readers can trust this person when he or she writes about the article's particular subject. If necessary, students may also discuss the publisher's credibility or reputation, the credibility of the research used in the article, the timeliness of the article, and so forth. Finally, bias is another point that may be discussed in the evaluation paragraph. A basic internet definition of bias is, quote, prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that is considered to be unfair. For our purposes in the AnnBib assignment, bias might include questions regarding research funding, author or publisher affiliations, a failure to fairly discuss opposing or alternative viewpoints on the subject, and so forth. Avoid taking for granted that just because an article is published online on a credible website or even within a peer-reviewed academic journal, that the author is automatically trustworthy. Let's discuss this evaluation process further as I use a few different examples highlighted in the previous videos on citations and summary paragraphs. So we're going to start with this first one that I found in the Academic Search Complete database by Erica Mizako-Boas. Notice that in this record in the database next to the author's name, this particular source has a footnote. If you scroll down to the bottom, it's actually going to tell you the author's affiliations. So the author worked in the Liberal Studies Department at Santa Clara University in California at the time of the publication of her article. Now, that footnote with the author affiliations isn't always going to be available. So if we go back to the Bannatyne article that I was also using, notice that next to her author name, there is no footnote. So we're not going to find any information about who she was working for when she published this. But that's okay, because sometimes the articles themselves will give this information as well. So in Boas's article, notice that after the title and her name, in italics, it's telling us again where she worked. So you might see that sometimes, especially in academic articles, that next to the name of the author, they might tell you a university or organization where the author worked. In Bannatyne's article, it actually includes a little mini biography at the end of the article. So next to her name at the top, there's nothing. But if you scroll to the end, it's giving us this mini biography on her. It says she's a leading scholar on Halloween who has written 5 books, and that this essay is part of What It Means to Be American, a partnership of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History and Zocalo Public Square. So sometimes the articles themselves will provide this information. Other times, though, that's not going to be available. In the Brian Handwerk article published in the National Geographic website, his name is not a hyperlink, it doesn't connect us to a biography on him, and if we scroll down to the bottom, nothing more is said about his credentials. So sometimes no information might be provided in the article itself, and you're just going to have to do an internet search on that person to find out their educational or work experience. Okay, so moving on. Let's go back to the works cited that we've been putting together. So with this first source by Leslie Bannatyne, with hers, not only did I have that mini biography in the article itself at the end telling me that she's an author and she is considered a leading scholar on Halloween, but when I researched her by just doing a Google search on her name, like so, I found that she has her own website. And on her website, she provides more background information about her work experience. It says that she is an author who writes on folklore and popular culture. One of the country's foremost authorities on Halloween, she has shared her knowledge on television specials for the History Channel with Time Magazine, Slate, National Geographic, CNN, and so forth. And then if I click on more, it gives me a more thorough biography on her. So I'm getting this information from her personal website when I put it together. So I'm going to summarize some of that information, providing a few details to support my general evaluation of her credentials. So I said, Leslie Bannatyne is very knowledgeable on the subject of Halloween's history in the U.S., as evidenced by the multiple books and articles that she's published on the subject within reputable magazines like Time Magazine and National Geographic. I guess I was missing a word. She's even spoken about the subject in television programs, including specials for the History Channel. Clearly, she's been recognized as a national figure on the subject. I couldn't find anything about her educational background, however, so she is not necessarily a professional historian per se. She also fails to cite any of the sources in her articles, which makes this particular piece a little less trustworthy in my eyes. So let me talk about a little bit of what I did there, right? I emphasized her work experience, giving some details. I mentioned how she seems to be recognized as a national figure, but I might want to qualify that, saying she's been recognized by media corporations as a national figure on the subject, because we don't really know if academically she's been recognized as a leading figure. Like, would other professors of history recognize her as a leading figure? I don't know, partly because I can't find her educational background. I don't know if she's a professional historian, so that makes me a little bit wary about giving her too much credibility here. And the fact that she fails to cite sources in her article, she doesn't tell her readers where she's getting her information, again, makes it a little bit more questionable. Not so much that I couldn't use this source in my paper or in my annotated bibliography, but I need to be honest about acknowledging that it's not as credible, at least on the surface, as it might have been if we had been given more information about her. I also want to point out here that what I did is I created a hyperlink to her personal website. So I'm going to remove that so I can show you the process of how I created it to begin with. When you're giving this evaluation information, the credentials of the authors, if you're going to use additional sources, like in this case, her own personal website, it isn't a bad idea to provide that to your own readers to back up what you are saying about the author. So you can do that by creating a hyperlink. So I'm going to, again, highlight her name where I want the hyperlink, and then I come up to Insert, Hyperlink, and then I'm just going to copy and paste that URL, and it will automatically become a hyperlink. Another option would be to put that URL information inside a footnote, which I'll demonstrate in just a minute. But again, just want to remind you, if you are using sources outside of the article itself, like a work website or an online profile, try to find out more specific details. When you are trying to find more specific details about an author, then you probably want to consider sharing that source either as a hyperlink or in a footnote, but you don't need to create a separate works cited page for your annotated bibliography. If it's just general knowledge about the person, like where they got their degrees or where they currently work, you absolutely do not need to indicate where you got that information. Only do so if it's more specialized information, like this information about where she's published other articles. So again, another example then, moving on to the Boas article. With her article, the article itself mentioned that she was working at Santa Clara University. But to find out more about her, what I did was I just, again, did a search on her name. So did a Google search using her full name, and I got this link to her faculty webpage at Santa Clara University, where I get, again, more information, including her educational background, the classes that she teaches, some of the articles that she has out. I could look at her CV for even more information, but frankly, I don't need that level of information in my annotated bibliography. So I could read this mini bio about her, and then I would write my evaluation. So I put it together like this. Dr. Boas has both the educational background and professional experience to make her a credible source of opinion on the sexualization of elementary school children in American culture. She earned her PhD in 2013 from the University of California at Berkeley Graduate School of Education, Social and Cultural Studies, and taught at Santa Clara University while she wrote and published her article. Her faculty webpage notes that she also worked for 5 years in a public elementary school, giving her additional work experience with children. Finally, she supports her own research in her article with an impressive amount of academic sources. So again, if we go back to her original article, it truly is impressive. She has nearly 2 pages worth of citations. Her references begin there and they go on nearly 1.5 pages of single space sources. So that's really impressive. And if you look more closely at these sources, the vast majority of them are being published in academic journals or books. So she's using really good research. Alright, so going back to, this is how I concluded my evaluation paragraph. All in all, the article seems very trustworthy. The only potential problem with applying her article to my own research question is that she only looked at one Halloween party at one California elementary school, which may not be representative of what's happening at other schools across America. So while her paper gives a nice case study, I wouldn't want to take it too far and say just because it happened at that one California elementary school, that's exactly what's happening at all the other elementary schools. So here, because I again cited her faculty webpage, I could include that URL as a hyperlink again, or I could create a footnote. So if I did that, you do a footnote by coming up to the References tab and then Insert Footnote. So what I would do if I were using the footnote method instead is I'd go to her webpage, copy the URL, and then just paste it there. Whichever method you choose to use, whether it's creating a hyperlink to the websites where you're getting their information about the credentials, or whether it's using a footnote, it doesn't matter to me which method you use, just be consistent. So if I were actually creating this AnnBib as a student myself, I wouldn't use both methods. I would pick one and use that consistently throughout my annotated bibliography. Okay. So when it comes to the handwork article, like I said, with him, we don't have any information about him in the article itself. So again, I would just search for the guy's name. It looks like he has a few different websites that mention him. That would help me determine a little bit more about him. It looks like he's a freelance journalist. He's written for a variety of reputable magazines like the Smithsonian Magazine and National Geographic. Again, I'd look more into him to get a better understanding, and then I would write my evaluation of him, which I haven't done yet. I also want to point out, though, that I know some of you might be looking at sources where there is no identified author, and I just want to caution you to be careful with that. So, for example, there's this history website article about Halloween around the world, but when I opened it up when I was doing my research, I didn't see an identified author, and in fact at the bottom it just says that it was published by the website editors. So again, I'm not getting a specific author, and therefore I can't evaluate their specific credentials. So be a little bit careful about choosing sources without an identified author like this. It's going to make evaluating them a little bit harder. So again, know that you may be taking a risk that the article isn't as credible as others where the author is identified. However, if the article is being published by a highly credible organization or business, then you may choose to use it if you want to. In this type of situation, evaluate the organization's credentials and the article's use of research in your evaluation paragraph, instead of looking at the author's credentials. For example, if I wanted to use this Census Bureau article talking about Hispanic heritage that was published during Hispanic Heritage Month, talking about the Hispanic population and its growth in the past few years, if I were talking about Halloween-related holiday traditions and how the Hispanic population has been growing and how that's affecting our traditions, I could use this article. I don't have an identified author, but I would instead analyze the credentials and the reputation of the U.S. Census Bureau. I could go to their About Us page to learn more about the Bureau. If I knew more about how they gathered their census data and how they collated it into reports, I could share that too. These would be some of the things that I would do if I wanted to use this article. It says, for example, that the Bureau is the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people and economy, right? And in general, we'd probably trust this government organization's collection of data as being legitimate, and therefore their article about the Hispanic population is probably pretty trustworthy. So I'd say something along those lines in my evaluation paragraph on that particular source. Okay, one last thought before I close this video. My examples here cannot cover every contingency or situation when evaluating sources. You need to use your best judgment and do your best to discuss what makes a source more or less credible for its readers. If you can't find any information on an author or a publisher, and the article doesn't use any research itself that it's citing, then it's probably not a source you want to use in this class anyway. If in doubt, email your professor. Also remember that you can work with the KCC librarians not only to find sources for your AnnBib, but also to research the author's credentials, so don't hesitate to ask them for help if you're struggling. Please watch the next video in this series to learn more about writing analysis paragraphs for the English 1 annotated bibliography assignment.